Free stuff that all these nice companies were giving you, all these services and products, were completely untrustworthy and completely leaky. Now, at least now we don't have to have the debate about that, because now we know that that is factually the case. If you use any of this stuff, you're part of, a monitoring infrastructure. So the debate is now over. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it, and what does it mean for journalists, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and all of us? So many people use these kinds of things. I like to use Facebook as an example, but the same, of course, goes for all these other so-called free, wonderful services. Of course, it's free, right? In the same way that the pigs in the barn, they get free food, free housing, and free medical. And it's all great right up until the day when the butcher shows up, and then it's not so great. So Facebook is sort of like that. And when I try to explain to Facebook to non-technical people, I always say, well, once upon a time there was this building material. This is a picture of it. It's called asbestos, and it is a phenomenally great building material. I mean, it's vibration resistant, it's fire retardant, it's cheap, it's strong, it insulates the building. It really, when you think about it, everything should be built out of asbestos, especially hospitals and children's daycare centers, right? Given the properties of the material. Asbestos has one tiny disadvantage. It gives you cancer. That's just a little hiccup there. Which, by the way, in terms of building engineering is completely irrelevant, except for humans it's not so irrelevant. So think of Facebook that way. Yes, it's free and it's convenient and it works and yada yada. It's all good, except of course you're basically doing the spy's work for them now, because you're reporting on yourself and you're reporting on your friends to a range of authorities over which you have no control. So I think Facebook, like many of these other services, really should only be used by trained professionals wearing protective clothing and gloves and wash your hands afterward and all that stuff. So we thought it was true, and now we know. All those iDevices, and of course I have one of those Android spy devices as well. My Nokia died on me. These devices are all completely untrustworthy. So it's fine if you have one and if you use it to get a map on a little screen when you walk from one place to another place in a town you don't yet know. That's all fine. Just if you want to have a private conversation, then make sure the iPhone isn't in the room, or put it in like one of those metal little boxes, like a metal cookie drum or something like that. Or a fridge also works really well. And of course, it's not just the iPhone, and it's not even just Microsoft. These are just two of the companies we love to hate. None of this stuff can be trusted, and we now know this with 100% certainty. And this is not going to change in the near future. So we need to figure out alternatives, and we need to help other people to actually use those alternatives, even if some of those alternatives might not be completely grown up or very user-friendly right now. This is a big job. Turns out that if you actually search for or try to use some of these tools, that in itself apparently makes you a target for organizations like the NSA. So again, it sounds a little bit tinfoil hat, but we now know from the documentary proof that this is actually the case. So if you're using the Tor browser, or if you're searching for Tor, then already that gets you noticed apparently. It's that bad. When basically all you want to do is just have your privacy, which is a constitutional right if you're from a country that has a constitution, and it's your right under the European Treaty for Human Rights, and it's your right under UN Declaration. So these are all companies that we won't be able to trust for the foreseeable future. So it's not just limited to software services, it's hardware, it's all kinds of stuff. All of this stuff, just consider it untrustworthy. And of course, this is just a very limited list. There is much, much, much more. So really, only the stuff that is really close to you, that you can have some measure of control over, that you can maybe trust. All the other stuff, assume it's leaky until proven otherwise. So that's just what I've just described, is just a general global dragnet that most of us are at some level part of, whether we like it or not, unless you're sort of avoiding most electronic devices. Of course, if you're an actual target, that you're the individual, say a serious journalist doing some serious investigative reporting on either a national government or a major corporation, then you might actually be a directed target and fall under such department as the TAO group within the NSA, for instance, and certainly other smaller outfits have comparable groups. And large corporations will also have security/intelligence departments that will also do these kinds of things. Now, I'm not saying that, say, Shell or Dow Chemical have the same capabilities as the NSA, but to underestimate them would be a massive mistake because they actually hire people from those kinds of agencies to run their security departments. So, a big corporation will be the size of a medium-sized NATO country and will probably have comparable security and espionage capabilities. And of course, even less democratic oversight, so even less constrained. So again, this is all very sort of paranoid sounding, tinfoil head wearing kind of stuff. But now we have lots of detailed documentary information, at least about the kind of technologies that the NSA has been using back in 2008. So what they're using now today might be even more scary than this, but this is certainly something from several years ago where a chip could be added to a USB plug from, say, a printer that you ordered or a mouse or anything else with the USB. And then when you insert that USB cable in your you thought, well prepared and well secured laptop, then either software is injected or it starts broadcasting your keystrokes or other bad things starts to happen. So this is an actual picture of some of these people intercepting a box of electronics, opening the box, adding some stuff to it that is not put there by either the producer or desired by the recipient of the box. And then, you can try all kinds of stuff after that, but the box is now completely owned by a range of agencies. Now again, that may be US intelligence, or it may be another Western intelligence organization. It could also be other countries, because lots of other organizations are piggybacking on sort of the main NATO capabilities. The list of partner countries is now, I think, up to 38, and that's just what we know about. So everything we were always scared about, it's basically waking up in a bad Blade Runner movie sort of type situation where we are now. One of the talks that really stuck in my mind is the talk that Jacob Appelbaum did at the CCC conference last December in Hamburg, where he talked about a just released document that described a microwave beam device that was being used in Central Asia by the NSA, also from 2008 onwards, where they directed microwave beams at individuals and their laptops, and from the electromagnetic reflections from that, they could then discern information about the laptop and what's on the screen and stuff like that from distances up to 8 miles away. So if you're a journalist or a hacker doing a crypto party and there's somebody in the room who tells you that the US government is pointing beam weapons at their head to read their laptop, then that person may be a crazy person, but maybe not. And that is now the world we live in. So where crazy starts and reality ends is getting rather unclear now. Now, many of these problems have actually been known for quite a while. So there was a late 90s, 2000 report, and actually a 2001 report with recommendations to the EU Parliament in July 2001. And it said lots of interesting things, lots of good recommendations about IT policy and IT education in Europe and how citizens could be protected from foreign spying, particularly NSA and GCHQ spying. And then everybody went on holiday because this was July 2001. And then in the first week of September, everybody came back from holiday, and then something happened in New York, amongst other places, and everybody forgot about the report. And so fast forward 12 years, and now we've... everything that was already described in that report now turns to be completely true, and then some more. And in the intervening time, Europe spent about €1 trillion, that's trillion with a T, 12 zeros, on American software, which we already knew at that point was probably spying on us. So we didn't spend €1 trillion on building European technology and a European technology infrastructure that could have prevented a lot of the spying that's going on. So probably we lost an additional €1 trillion on industrial espionage of major European companies that then went not to Siemens, but the contract from maybe a Chinese customer went to General Electric or something like that. So our governments have utterly failed both their citizens and their own economies, and really their basic job really bad. And up to this day, right now even, there is not yet a real sort of policy framework. Okay, now we know that all this foreign technology is completely untrustworthy. What are we going to do about it? We are still in the phase of describing how bad it is. We're not yet in the phase of thinking about what we're going to do about it, which is really bad, given that we're now 15 months into this thing, and really we're 13 years and over €1 trillion into this thing. Minimal, maybe double that amount of money. So this is quite horrible. So yeah, now what? So we woke up in a nightmare that was worse than the most paranoid crap we could think of in the late 90s and the early noughties. It reminds me a bit about Rob Gongrijp's talk from 2005, We've Lost the War. I don't know if people haven't seen that. It's on YouTube, CCC talk in 2005. It was not a very fun talk, but I think very instructive if you watch it now, 9 years later. There is stuff we can do. Certainly the hacker community needs to play an important role into this, and journalists also, I think, have an important role in both becoming capable themselves of some of the basic techniques and technologies and procedures, and it's the hackers that need to help them get there. Because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what constitutes good InfoSec behavior, and some of these tips are not really the good ones, I'm afraid. So protecting yourself as an individual from an outfit like the NSA, if you are a target, is really, really difficult. And that would be an understatement. I would say it's pretty much impossible. You'd have to go completely offline and be completely paranoid and never speak out loud and do all kinds of other almost impossible things. But there is a global dragnet that sucks up all our data, and the reason why the NSA can monitor half the planet, basically everybody who uses the internet or anything that runs on electricity, for on average something like 10 cents per Western person or internet user per day, is because we give most of the data away in clear text. We type it into Facebook, we type it into Google, we type it into all these things. So they don't have to do anything, they just copy the stuff that we type in on our free time. So if most of us would use just some of the basic tools that are freely out there and that not that hard to use, requires a little bit of discipline, we can up the cost of monitoring you as an individual at that same level from 10 cents a day to something like $100,000 per day. Because now if they want to get the same amount of information about you and your life, now they need to actually start following you around with a team of people in a series of vans and with directed microphones. And it's still possible if you're important enough, but they can't do that to 2.5 billion people on this planet. Even the NSA's budget does have limits. So we can sort of outcompete them by just increasing the average cost of mass surveillance. And this will then hopefully protect also some of the people who need it most. So you can create a lot of disinfo. This is the nice thing about social media networks, that if people believe what's actually on there, then spread bullshit info, poison the database. Tweet through a series of proxies or over Tor, have somebody else tweet in your name from another location, things like that. You can easily at least create a little bit of confusion. We all need to move away from .com, .org, .net infrastructures because they fall under the Patriot Act. So the US government asserts, and they back that up with very concrete action, that if you have a server and it runs under a .com domain, it is US national sovereign territory. And that means that whatever happens on your server falls under the Patriot Act, which basically means you have no rights and the US government can do whatever the hell it wants, whenever the hell it wants, no limits. If you run, for instance, under a Swiss domain, preferably also having the server physically somewhere in Europe in a more or less safe place, then at least you have some protections. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying that if the NSA really wants to get in there, they won't, but at least there is some threshold. I'm Dutch originally, hence the color, so I still have some of that, and I live in Germany, and Germany also, for a range of historic reasons, has strong constitutional protections, where basically it is assumed in the constitution that the function of law is to protect citizens against the state, because Germans know probably better than any other Western country that it's the government actually that you have to be really scared of. Companies sometimes do funny stuff, but when it comes to genocide, usually there's a government involved. So this is basically explaining to non-technical people basic InfoSec policies. If you're a journalistic organization, there's some stuff you need to think about. Keeping your data confidential, keeping the integrity of your data. So, confidentiality, of course, if you use something like Dropbox, your confidentiality is already zero, but your bigger problem actually might be that your integrity is also zero. So if you stick a document in Dropbox, then for certain the NSA is going to know what's in the document, but much worse even maybe, that they can alter the document. And then you take that document, which you thought you typed last night, and you go publish it, and it's been altered. And now your name as a journalist is completely screwed because everybody's laughing their head off about some crazy article you've just published, which completely doesn't make sense. So sometimes integrity is more important, actually, of data Then confidentiality. Certain confidentiality, for instance, with news is only relevant up until the moment of publishing, right? You need source protection after that, but the article itself you need to protect up to the moment of publication. After that, by definition, it's out there. But if you have a whole bunch of documents, you need to preserve integrity, because if that's gone, then if you can't trust your own documents, you're screwed. And then, of course, availability. I've seen outfits run everything on Google Docs. Now, Google can refuse you access to all that stuff at any time for any reason. So if you don't have a local backup that is physically under your control, something in your pocket preferably, then you may literally lose all your stuff. It's as simple as that. And of course, if you have a bunch of rules within any organization, they need to apply to everybody, because otherwise they're very quickly not going to apply to anybody. So CIA, easy to remember acronym, confidentiality, integrity, availability. So it's always about behavior and technology, and you need to do both things right all the time. And if your technology fails because you're trying to do something secret but you're using an iPad, you're probably completely screwed. And of course, if you have all the technology right but you're using the name of your dog, which is on your Facebook page, as a password, then none of the super duper encryption stuff is going to matter very much. So it's always the two that need to be worked all the time. And this requires a significant amount of discipline, and this is why it's so hard. Because even if people can do the tech right, do they have the discipline to not leave their laptops lying around, for instance, stuff like that? It isn't really not easy always, but it is important if you want to do this. So protection, people tend to think about sort of the passive stuff, castle walls, firewalls, and encryption, all that stuff. And you should have all that, but you should also assume that no castle wall is perfect. You should always assume that it can be breached or climbed over or crawled under, or something can happen, or you leave the back door open because you didn't know. So you should have some sort of mechanism for detecting that breach. Now, this can be something very clever electronic, but it might also be a procedural thing. If you're a system administrator, you should do a regular check, maybe automated, but maybe manual check, how many admin accounts are there on my server? And if suddenly there's an extra one, that's not the most competent of hack, but that's an indication that something funny is going on. Now, there's, of course, many more clever things. I'm not even an expert anymore. But there's procedural things you can do to detect breaches. Old school methods, read all the Len Dayton novels, all the Cold War spy tricks, leaking information and then seeing where it comes back to you. I mean, there's all kinds of old stuff you can do, even without very fancy tech. Now, if you detect a breach, then you need a reaction plan. And you need to make the plan before you detect a breach. There's no point in having a great technology, very expensive firewalls, and having a super duper detection mechanism, but not having a plan for what you're going to do when the alarm bell goes off. Because probably there'll be panic, so that's when you need to plan the most. And ideally, you will have practiced that plan, right? A fire plan for an office building only works if you actually do a fire drill. And it's all a bit funny when people do that, but actually, if you have that once in a 25-year fire, you'll be very happy that you've done the drill and everybody knows where the exit is and where the collection point is and all that stuff. So you need passive protection, you need detection of breach of that protection, and then you need a reaction plan. And the reaction plan could be several phone books thick document if you're a bank, and it may be 3 sheets of paper with a couple of phone numbers of the trustworthy people that you're going to call when bad things happen. But have a plan and make sure everybody's aware of the plan and do a practice run before bad things happen. Now, the big problem, of course, is that most of our fellow humans, fellow citizens, are so far behind the curve, not through their fault of their own, just because computer education generally sucks really bad. So to explain this sort of stuff to them really requires time. And Snowden has made it a lot easier to have that conversation, but still don't underestimate how much effort goes into just getting people to a sort of a level of awareness and a level of interest, because sort of this is what we're up against. Many people think they know computers because they went to school and they had a computer training, but of course they didn't get computer training, they got a training in using Microsoft Word, which has very little actually to do with computers, right? So all over Europe, we have a European educational standard for computer education, and it mostly produces very bad secretaries, actually. But we teach people nothing about computers, information networks. The most basic concepts are utterly alien to most computer users. I mean, if we, let people drive cars the way we allow them to use computers, they literally would not know that you need to fill up the car with petrol. So we would have car drivers on the road with empty tanks. That would be normal. We consider that normal in computer support. Have you turned it off and on again? That's our basic solution to most problems. So I strongly believe, no matter how non-knowledgeable people are, that you can actually take them in a couple of hours or a day, take them to quite a high level, and actually doing that can really empower them to say, oh, well, this morning at 9 o'clock, all this stuff was a complete mystery to me, but now at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I know what an operating system is, I've installed an encryption software on my laptop, I've cut an encryption key, and I now understand all this stuff. And people are massively empowered if you take them through some things. So I'm a former IBMer, so I like these blocky vertical architecture pictures. It comes with the territory. So I try to explain some things. This is how all these different bits of your computer sort of relate to each other, and this is the different bits where security problems can occur. So then you can explain, look, you can, do a crypto key all you want, but if you run a fundamentally insecure operating system like Windows or Mac OS, then none of that's going to work. Now, Linux I think is slightly less bad. At least it can be made to be good, although of course your mileage may vary there. But proprietary operating system from an American manufacturer, they are by definition completely hopeless. Forget it. It's over once you are really a bit of a target. So we need stuff like this. ThinkPad X60 with an open source core boot BIOS on it, and cutting the wires that go to the built-in microphone so the thing can't physically listen in on you and all that stuff. If you have a webcam, tape it over, but cut out the microphone, maybe cut out the speakers, because we now have BIOS viruses that communicate with other BIOS viruses in the same room with ultrasound. So you need to physically disable the speakers. You can remove the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi and all that other stuff. Aside from being a former IBMer, the reason I like ThinkPads is that it takes one screwdriver, you take the back off, and you can do this all manually, literally on a kitchen table, right? You don't need to be an engineer. It's relatively easy. So, yes, you can literally do this on a kitchen table. And I've now taught this to a couple of people who don't have a technical background, and I got them in a single morning to the level where they could do this, where they could open up a ThinkPad and take out the Bluetooth card and do some other stuff. And they were massively empowered by the process, by thinking, okay, 3 hours ago this was like this. Oh, you need to be a super duper clever hacker. Oh, I'm a hacker now because I just did this. It's great. You can get these laptops secondhand for around £100 mark. There are quite a few still floating around in the UK. So this is how I explain the advantages of open source versus proprietary crap. With proprietary crap, you just get a binary blob and you have no fucking clue what the software does. With open source, you have access to the source, and therefore you or people you trust can audit the software and can see what it does. Is it perfect? No, obviously not. We saw that with Heartbleed. Sometimes it's a disaster. But it's probably less a disaster than the built-in spying infrastructure that comes with a lot of proprietary software that we not only don't know about, but that we can't know about because we can't audit the stuff. So again, Ubuntu, not the most secure operating system, but certainly a good way to at least get people off the proprietary crap. And then of course you need to deinstall a whole bunch of things and not install certain other things, but at least it gets people on a path to thinking, oh, there is something else than stuff that either Steve Ballmer or Steve Jobs wants to sell me, one of the Steves. There is an alternative, and then maybe we can get them on a path to even better alternatives. So something that everybody can do today, no matter what platform you're running, is using different browsers for different sets of behavior. So I basically always use at least 3 browsers, which is Chromium, the open source version of Chrome, which is where I do all my sort of social media stuff. I occasionally have to interface with Facebook because of some guest teaching I do, and where Facebook is used as a digital classroom, which is in itself a whole other story. So I have a browser for that, and YouTube and LinkedIn and all that crap. And then I have a Firefox dressed up with a whole bunch of plugins where I do most of my work, news reading and writing on wikis and all that stuff. And then I have, of course, in the lower corner on the left, the Tor browser for just, watching stuff when I don't want people to know that I'm looking up stuff. So by sort of compartmentalizing your surfing behavior, you can already lower your sort of digital footprint, somewhat at least. Is this perfect? No, of course not. But again, it's a small step that everybody can do, and it gets you thinking about things. So this is how Tor works. I'm assuming that most people here know how that works. I'm not going to get into it, but yes, Tor is on top of other things you can do, is a good step to being less completely monitorable when you're doing things over the web or over other internet connections. So this is really difficult for people, good password policy. Really, really difficult. Of course, there are almost religious debates about what constitutes a good password, so I'm not going to do that today, because that's like Windows versus Mac and all kinds of other religious, AMD versus Intel, and I'm not even going to go there. I like this picture as a basic explanation of what constitutes a good password. I think this is one of the best infographics I've seen so far, and I've watched a lot of them. So I have a personal preference for longer, simpler passwords, meaning lowercase, just a sentence. Basically, take a sentence from something that's personally meaningful to you, personal memory, something from a book or a poem. Not the famous poem that it's on your Facebook page, not that one, but pick another one, something obscure, but something that's, and then just do a 20-character lowercase password that you can easily, quickly type without too many mistakes. Again, it's my personal preference. I think that works very well. Other people might prefer other things, but pick something that is strong and that you won't be tempted to write down or stick in some horrible, insecure password management tool. So a basic explanation on public key encryption. Public key encryption for most people, non-techies, is very, very counterintuitive. What do you mean I'm going to publish my crypto key? Isn't that insecure? No, it's not, and this is how it works. So a basic explanation of theory. Usually when I do training, I spend a day with people, or maybe even 2 days with a small group, and most of that is very hands-on stuff. It's literally, take out your laptops, now we're going to install stuff. But I always start with a bit of theory. And if people just have a little bit of a theory sort of handled on what they're actually installing afterwards, things go really a lot better. So a little bit of theory is very, very practical. Different tools do different things, which is also something I find that you need to explain to people, and that is useful, so that they, again, can adapt their tools to their situation. Because I don't know a journalist who operates in Asia what they're going to be confronted with. So they need to have a range of options, and so they can adapt their behavior to whatever the new option is, including not using any of this stuff at all, which might also be a good option if you're really under threat and if you're really, no longer sure about your hardware. Now then, of course, for the super paranoid, or the serious journalist and activist amongst us, there's of course Tails. It runs from a stick. I like the metal sticks because they're physically strong and they're not break, and with a little loop you can even wear it 24/7 around your neck, in the shower, it doesn't matter. So you never ever let it out of your sight physically. And on there sits a Linux-based operating system which is completely geared towards hyper-paranoia. Everything is encrypted, all network connections run over Tor. And nothing stays on the laptop. Now you still have the problem that you don't always know for sure whether you can trust the laptop. So actually the laptop should also always be within 2 meters of you, which is really, really difficult and requires a lot of discipline. That's the ideal situation. But even if you can't always do that, then probably this is a big step up from almost any other operating system you can imagine. Now of course Tails comes with Windows XP camouflage, so it pretends to be Windows XP. So if you are sitting with your little cashboard mini laptop that you still think is reasonably secure in a cafe where you're on the Wi-Fi anonymously, then you can just pretend to be a tourist and you won't look out of place at all, because you just look like somebody who has a little laptop and using Windows XP. But in fact you may be the next Snowden, leaking some interesting document to some cool journalist who is going to do something, or you may be the journalist receiving those documents. So, how paranoid do we need to be? Well, I have the great privilege of hanging out with a bunch of whistleblowers on a regular basis from the intelligence world. So I don't think I'm personally that important that I'm under sort of permanent surveillance, but I do live with a couple of people who might be. So we make this joke always about that, if we're alone at home, we tend to say to the room, we know you're listening. And hey, if there's nobody listening, then there's no harm done, except we scare the cats. But if there is somebody listening, then we just, The other thing is, of course, is to have lots of sex and do it very loudly, right? Because there are all these sad little men, and maybe some women, but mostly men with earphones listening to you, then you might as well sort of point out the fact that you're having more fun than they are at that point. So that's good. So we need to move, and we need to facilitate the move to new technologies. Right now, the once relatively decentralized internet is rapidly becoming centralized, and it is a surveillance nightmare Facebook, Google, and all that other crap called cloud, which basically means giving your digital life over to people you don't know and you can't trust. And that's what cloud essentially means. I mean, it also means a few other things, but that's really the gist of it. We need to move to decentralized and ideally to distributed. Ideally, there should be nothing centralized, but it's going to take some effort to get there. But every step we go there, at least will make the dragnet surveillance harder, which should be an objective. And we need to dare to think fairly radically out of the box for that. So we maybe need to develop completely new hardware, processors. Maybe we need to do open source processor design and flash them on FPGAs. And yes, they're going to be expensive and they're going to be ugly and they're going to be horribly slow. And we'll only be able to do text, mail, and some other basic stuff. But at least we'll have a little machine that we can trust. And then we can just do gaming and YouTube watching on our laptops, which we know are probably completely horribly insecure. But hey, it's only YouTube, right? But we'll have to do some radical out-of-the-box thinking to actually get devices we can trust for sure. Because right now we don't have them. I dress up my laptop with all kinds of crypto stuff, but hey, it's post-2009 chipset with all the remote management crap in there, so I don't really trust it, not ultimately. We also need to acknowledge that there may be some problems for which there is no technical solution. And so some of the techno-optimism that we tend to get lost in as a technology community, we might need to sort of have some critical self-reflection on that, basically. Because, of course, we were going to solve the entire planet. Every problem was going to solve by technology back in the 90s, and we've sort of turned a little bit back from that, but sometimes it's still that sort of thinking. And sometimes, actually, the use of technology gets you really into deep water, and maybe some of the stuff we've been so bravely building over the last 15 years as a technology community turns out to be a giant, big mistake. Not of our bad intentions, but because of the bad intentions of other people. So this kind of sort of blind techno-optimism is something we really should let go of. This is some other person who was just building technology and didn't want to be bothered by questions about its use. But of course, if we are technologists and we are building this stuff or helping other people building this stuff, then actually we have a responsibility to think about what other ways it could be used except for maybe putting a satellite in orbit. So the Center for Investigative Journalism is doing a symposium on this in the first week of December. It's going to be in London. If people are interested, I have a box of flyers over there. Maybe if that can be brought up. Anybody who wants one or more flyers to, not just for yourself, but to give to other people, if you know journalists or other people in the media who might be interested. The goal of the symposium is to bring the hacker scene and serious journalists together to talk about all of this stuff, plus a whole bunch of other things. There's going to be some fairly famous journalists and some fairly famous IT people, including people like Eben Moglen, and we're hoping for Bruce Snyder and some other people. And it should be a really good, some really good lectures and mostly discussions. And of course, if people have interesting technology products that they want to show there, then also again, please contact us. And we might be able to do something interesting together. Journalists need to be checked up if we're going to have any journalism worth anything. And yeah, it's probably the hackers who need to help because commercial industry is probably not going to do it, most of it. So I'm going to be here till tomorrow. I don't know if there's a bit of time now for Q&A. I'm probably pretty much out of time. But if there are questions, I don't know if there's a mic, otherwise I can repeat. I'm going to do a workshop on all of this stuff, more or less hands-on. We may be also discussing sort of the method of teaching people. So if you want to have more discussion about this, please come to the workshop tent, which is next door here at 4:30. And I'll be there for at least 2 hours and as much longer as needed. So I'm out of time, not out of work. So I hope to speak anybody's interested later today. And thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if there's people who want to ask a question now, then please do. And otherwise, we'll see each other later.
How can you know if the PGP fingerprint is the correct one there?
I can't, but it's a start. I think I know it mostly by heart now, but so yeah, that's my PGP fingerprint. I think I'm 99.9% sure, and that's my thing. But if you just type my name into the search engine of your choice, then you can find my blog, on which you can also find various variations of these slides, all of which are Creative Commons licensed, so if you want to use them, please do. The handbook I spoke about earlier is also linked from the front page. It's a PDF. We're working on the EPUB and Mobi versions. Any feedback on that is also very, very welcome, because I'm sure we've made mistakes here and there. So over the next month, we're processing feedback. There is a feedback email address inside the book file, including, again, a crypto key if you want to do it securely. And yes, please take some of these leaflets, if not for yourself, then to put them in the pub of whatever city you live, or give to journalists or media professionals or students of media, or to yourself.